Welcome back to SEEK 2019 here in Indianapolis for day 2 of our conference. We have a full, wonderful list of content ahead of us today. Priscilla, where can they find the live stream content?
They can go to seek2019.com/livestream, or they can just stay here and see all of it.
That sounds like a wonderful idea. I know today we have 6 impact sessions coming up, one after the other, with a few big-name speakers. Who's speaking today?
We have Father Agustino Torres and Dr. Tim Gray.
I know Father Mike Schmitz is speaking, Jennifer Fulwiler, Damon Owens. So tune in here. Those will be starting in just a few minutes, and we'll see you guys later.
Those watching via live stream. Our speaker today is the writer and host of one of the most popular Catholic radio shows on Sirius XM channel 129. She created a viral online saint generator where you can receive your own personal patron saint to have pray with you and walk with you. And you can find that at saintsnamegenerator.com. Her best-selling memoir, Something Other Than God, was a finalist in the Best Memoir and Biography category in the Goodreads Choice Awards. Her new book is entitled One Beautiful Dream. She lives with her husband and 6 young children in Austin, Texas. It is my pleasure to welcome Jennifer Fulwiler.
Hello, it is so good to be here. I am in from Texas. Where are my Texans at? Oh, that's even better than I expected. All right, you guys got me, right? You have to laugh very loudly at all of my jokes. I want you to start the wave. I'm counting on you. I am here in Indianapolis with all 6 of my children. So this will be a 5-hour talk. This is my only chance to relax. I'm not getting off the stage. So I have 6 kids, ages 14 down to 5. I will save you the math. We had 6 babies in 8 years. No twins, just one baby after another. I will now give you a moment of silence to thank God that I am not here to talk to you about natural family planning. I am here to talk to you about atheism. And this talk always attracts the people who come to this conference who are maybe atheists themselves, or maybe not sure what they believe anymore. Maybe they're feeling a little lost. And I'm always surprised that you think of this conference as being everyone's so bought in and on fire for their faith. Every time I give this talk, I have people coming up to me afterwards, and it's almost like we're meeting in secret. They don't want anyone to hear, and they say, I'm an atheist. So I want to welcome those of you. I want to give you a special welcome who came out here to seek, who don't know what you believe, who are having doubts. It's a courageous thing to do, to be out here when you're feeling spiritually lost. Because obviously this conference is a very on-fire place. I mean, I have a daily 2-hour radio show on a network called The Catholic Channel. And I look around SEEK, and sometimes I'm like, I don't think I'm Catholic enough to be here. So for those of you who are feeling kind of spiritually lost, very special welcome to you. I'm going to tell you about my conversion from lifelong atheism to Catholicism. And it was ultimately my search for truth. And as I tell you my story, I want you to think about this idea of what is truth? It's a popular thing to say right now. We want to seek truth. We want to know what is true, look for objective truth. What does that mean? What is truth? Think about that as I tell you my story today. So to start at the beginning, I was always an atheist. I mean, going back to earliest childhood. I didn't ever wonder if God might exist. I didn't say a prayer just in case. The strict atheist materialist worldview came very naturally to me. I think I inherited this from my dad. He is an engineer. Any engineers in the house? All right. Oh, I'm very pleasantly surprised with this crowd. All right, so my dad's a civil engineer, son of a civil engineer. I come from a long line of civil engineers. And so, you know, engineers are great. They've got that rigidly logical, evidence-based, proof-based view of the world. And so my dad, when I was growing up, was always an atheist. He now says he's agnostic. We're moving the right direction, so keep him in your prayers. Now, and I think I inherited my natural affinity for atheism from him. it just seemed kind of obvious to me. You would only believe what you can prove, right? I believe that this microphone exists because I'm holding it. How could you believe in something that there is no material evidence for? I inherited that way of thinking about things from my dad. Now, my mom was not an atheist. She is what philosophers call a Macyist. That is someone who is more concerned with whether Macy's has an additional 30% off this weekend than whether there's a compelling case for a monotheistic God. She's one of those people who's like, I don't care. I'm sure it'll all work out. So I definitely got my atheistic worldview from my dad. But he said something interesting to me all the time when I was growing up. He said, Jen, I'm not raising you to be an atheist per se, as much as I am raising you to seek truth and to question assumptions. To seek the truth no matter where it takes you, even if you don't like where it takes you, even if it makes you look foolish, even if it's inconvenient. Seek truth and question all of your assumptions. And I tell my atheist friends, be careful raising your kids that way because they'll grow up to become Catholic. So he was very big on this idea of seeking truth. And so I carried this very truth-seeking atheistic worldview all the way into college. And what I see now, when I look back at why I so strongly identified as an atheist, and why I was so not open to even any discussion about spirituality, about philosophy, about anything that might shake that view, is there were a couple of things going on. One is I simply thought the atheist materialist worldview was reasonable. But there was something else as well. Modern atheism, the new atheism, is very well branded. It is branded as well as Gucci and Tommy Hilfiger brand their own lines. It's a very well-branded phenomenon. And atheism has been branded as being for the intelligentsia. Smart people are atheists, right? That's what Richard Dawkins tells us on Twitter. Smart people are atheists. People who question assumptions, people who are highly educated, scientists, engineers, they're all atheists, right? I very much felt that brand of the new atheism. And even though I told myself that there was no emotion would ever impact what I believe about anything, inside, part of what kept me coming back to atheism and part of what kept me so closed-minded about any other worldview is that I thought it made me seem smart. I was afraid of being spiritually vulnerable. I grew up, I moved around a whole lot. I lived in like 15 different places before I was 15 years old. I was an only child. I spent a lot of time getting bullied really badly. I was always the nerd, I was always the outcast, and I spent a lot of time with just no friends. And let me tell you, having no friends back before the internet, having no friends in the 90s was a totally different experience than it is today. You can't even connect with randos on the internet. I mean, it was a very isolating experience. And I brought this baggage with me into my atheistic worldview. I clung to atheism in part because I did objectively think it was true, but also in part because I was afraid to be vulnerable. I had that view that's very common in modern atheism. I adopted the view of scientism, which basically says that everything I believe must be provable by the scientific method. If I cannot prove it like you can prove something in a laboratory, then I don't believe it. That is not how human beings have ever evaluated what is true. That is not how people have ever, that has never been the only criterion for evaluating what is true. And yet you see it rampant in modern atheistic circles, this scientism that says the only things we can know are true is that which is provable by the scientific method, and I clung to that because it was safe. It's safer to say that I don't believe any of this extra stuff. I only believe what I can prove and what I observe, and that way I will never have to be vulnerable, and I'll never having to risk looking dumb, looking ignorant. So that was a factor in my atheism, even though, again, I did objectively believe it was true. The first thing that kind of sent me off kilter in my atheist worldview, which I'd had my whole life, was after college, I began dating the guy who is now my husband. And when I found out that he believed in God, I was so shocked. And you have to understand a little bit about him to understand why this was such a shock to me. So he grew up really poor, raised by a single mother, so poor, in fact, that his mom often didn't know where their next meal was going to come from, and she couldn't even run the heat in the winter. They lived in Houston, so, I mean, it wasn't that bad, but they were very poor. And so she had heard in the movies and in pop culture about these schools like Yale and Harvard, and she said, look, I grew up in the country, I didn't even finish high school. All I know is that if you go to one of those schools, you won't be poor like me. So my husband ended up going to Yale. He didn't even know what the SATs were when he sat down to take it. He ended up going to Yale, graduating in 3 years with honors, Columbia Law School, Stanford Business School, and he studied for a master's in computer science while he was at Stanford, because why not? So he had this crazy background. And in fact, he was so in that sort of high-tech computer science world in Silicon Valley that he had a line on a job that if it had worked out, he would have been employee number 8 at a little tech startup. You might have heard of it. It's called Google. Now, but if he had taken that job, he wouldn't have moved to Austin, where we live, and he wouldn't have met me. And so I always tell him, honey, who needs billions of dollars when you have me? And you should see the look on his face when I say that one. So this was such a departure from his background that his mom drove with him when he went out to Stanford Business School. And on the whole drive there, she kept asking him, are you sure this Stancliffe place is a reputable institution? She had never heard of Stanford. So that is how much he sort of overcame his background. He got this crazy education. So when I found out that he believed in God, I said, but you're smart. That's so weird. And then it got weirder. He said he believed in Jesus. He said he believed in Jesus, which was that just seemed so absolutely crazy to me. And when I asked him why, he said, look, I don't practice the Christian faith. He'd grown up Southern Baptist. He said, I don't go to church. I don't read my Bible. I barely even pray. But I'll tell you this. He said, I was baptized in a full dunk Baptist baptism when I was 13 years old. And this is my super logical lawyer husband. He's also a CPA. I mean, this is like numbers, logical guy. He said, when I came up from those baptismal waters, I encountered something. I encountered someone. And he said, I don't know what I believe anymore. Again, I don't pray, I don't go to church, I don't know what I believe. But I do know this. I know that I encountered the living person of Jesus Christ when I was baptized, and I will never deny that. No one can ever take that away from me. And he gave me that testimony when we were dating, and I said, that's so weird, that talking all this crazy talk about Jesus. But what that did for me is it at least showed me, hanging out with him and his friends, that you can be a reasonable person, an educated, reasonable person, and still believe in things that can't be proven by the scientific method. You can believe in things that are external to the material world and be a reasonable person. I didn't see how, but I saw that it was possible. So fast forward to we got married and our first child was born, and that's when things really changed for me. Because I was so disconnected from the new life and babies. I'm an only child. My husband is an only child. My dad is an only child. I never even had a friend who had a baby in the house growing up. To be honest, I think I kind of thought that new human life comes from like a cloning room at the back of Starbucks. Like I forgot the health class, like, the miracle of life. Did you guys have to watch that? I kind of forgot that whole thing. And so when I had this baby, it was this shattering experience for me to be part of vulnerable new life. I'd only held a couple babies in my life. My husband had never held a baby. It's a shattering thing for us. And I looked at this baby, And I said, and there was one particular moment where I said, I know that the love that I feel for this child, the love that has come into my family since his birth, I know that this love has a source that is external to the neurons in our brain. I cannot prove this in a laboratory. I cannot prove this by the scientific method. But I know more than I know anything else in the world that this love is real, and that if the whole world blew up tomorrow, that this love would still exist and it would still be there. And that was the moment that I was no longer an atheist. That was the moment that I let go of this view of scientism, that everything I ever believe has to be evaluated by the scientific method. I realized we believe things all the time that you can't prove in a laboratory. There are plenty of other ways to evaluate what is true, and that is the moment I had when I looked at that baby. I said, I know that this love exists. And you know what? Maybe it's okay if I can't prove it in a scientific laboratory. So what do you do when you have a moment like this after a whole life of atheism? Well, I grew up in the Bible Belt. I spent some time at Texas A&M University. Any Aggies here? Oh, I knew it. All right. Well, but guys, actually it's weird because I transferred to go to UT because it was too religious. I was an atheist at the time. So anyone from University of Texas here? See, smaller, yeah, because I went to UT, I was like, I need to be around some atheists. And then I walked around UT campus in Austin, and I was like, oh, atheists, this is exactly what I was looking for. No, it's a great campus, I love both schools. So, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and I knew what people are supposed to do when they're starting, to think about religion and think about things outside the material world. So I decided to say a prayer, but I'd never done this before. So I'm this dumb, I literally started with a joke like, is this thing on? Like, how do you know when you're like talking to yourself versus talking to whatever else might be out there? So I said a good open-minded prayer. I said, to whatever thing or things might be out there, I am open to hearing from you now. And then I said amen because I'd seen it on TV. And then the craziest thing happened next. Nothing. So disappointed. I've seen the Hallmark movies. I have seen how this is supposed to work. You're supposed to, lights are supposed to happen, like some crazy music, maybe some angels. Bare minimum, like a weird coincidence, right? Nothing happened. I didn't realize when they say seek and ye shall find. This is true, that works. But notice no timetable is attached to that. I wasn't ready. It didn't happen instantaneously. So it was actually a few months later that I kept coming across these Christian books. And I wasn't looking for Christianity. I certainly didn't think the Christian God was going to be the one. But I kept coming across these Christian books, and I was trying to avoid them. And my husband, Joe, said to me, maybe you should stop blowing off these books. Maybe in your explorations, you should start with the only major, lasting world religion whose founder claimed to be God. Because, people who are trying to start religions, people who are trying to start cults, they claim to be God all the time. It's an easy move. Great way to start a religion. But then they make the very ungodlike move of dying and staying dead. And that doesn't tend to work out very well for their religions. So Joe said, why don't you start with that one, like the only one, whose founder was like, yeah, I'm God. So I said, okay. So I started reading these books. And to give you just a brief summary of what I found compelling about the case for Jesus, Lee Strobel does a great job with this. He's a fellow former atheist. Lee Strobel and some other authors, and a lot of the classic writers as well, point out, if you look at the incredible history of Judaism, the Jewish people had these religious and social institutions, like animal sacrifice, keeping the Sabbath holy, that they held to despite unspeakable persecution for thousands and thousands of years. And then, I'm paraphrasing from Lee Strobel here, but you've got this lower middle class guy who comes up from a lower middle class region, gathers this ragtag group of lower middle class followers, And then he's crucified along with other like 30,000 other guys by the Romans. And yet, shortly after this happens, you see waves and waves of Jewish people abandoning these social and religious institutions that they believed that to abandon would risk damning their souls to hell. You see thousands and thousands of them just in waves abandoning these practices because they claimed that they saw this man, Jesus Christ, risen from the dead. And he and other scholars have pointed out, there are a lot of secular theories about why that is. And they're worth considering. You can consider the different social, economic factors that might have been a factor. But what a lot of these apologists said was, hey, could you just consider that one option among all of them that explains this really inexplicable phenomenon? Maybe they actually did see Jesus Christ risen from the dead. Let's consider that theory as one among many. So that's just one example. There were a bunch of other arguments, the case for Jesus, that I found compelling. And so I thought, okay, next step, again, Bible Belt childhood, I know what I should do. I should buy one of these things I've heard so much about, a Bible. I did not have one in my house growing up. We had some old, dusty, heirloom copy that we kept in the attic. I did not have a Bible growing up. I was as isolated from the Bible as you could possibly be in a modern American childhood. So I go down to the bookstore. I had not been in the Bible section of a library or a bookstore except for this one time in the 4th grade when I took all the Bibles at my elementary school library and I moved them over to the fiction section. I thought I was the edgiest 4th grader anyone had ever seen. I was like, oh, you guys are amazing. Look what I did. I had not been in the Bible section of a bookstore or library since then. And I seriously felt so embarrassed. I had so branded myself as an atheist. And it was so part of my identity. And I so associated it with people thinking that maybe I was smart, maybe I knew something, that I was mortified that someone might see me. So I'm sneaking around, I go to the Bible section, and who knew there were so many? I thought there was just the one. But there was this whole shelf of like the women's Bible and the teens Bible. I didn't know. So I just bought the one that looked least like a Bible. It just had a black cover on it. There was no writing. I was like, that's what I'm looking for, so no one knows what I'm reading. So I get it. I take it home. Or actually first, when I checked out, I was so mortified about the idea of buying a Bible that I loudly asked for a gift receipt. I was like, I will need a gift receipt for that. It's for my friend. She's a Bible person. I don't know. So I got my opaque bag and my gift receipt. So I take this book home, and again, you don't understand the depth of my ignorance on this book. I did not even understand the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I figured, the Bible's a book. You start books on page 1, right? The main character usually comes into a book, like page 20, 30? So I'm in the Old Testament, waiting for the stories about, I knew there was some stuff involved Jesus and, some fishermen. And I'm like, have you guys read the Old Testament? There's some weird stuff in there. This is so weird. And I'm like, where are the fishermen? And then they killed 10,000 people. I'm like, wow, what is this? I was driving Joe crazy, too, because, he would come home stressed from work, and I'd be looking up from my Bible, and I'd be like, Joe, have you tried sacrificing a bird over a clay pot and dipping some red yarn and hyssop in its blood? I'm reading it here in the Bible. Evidently, that's something you're supposed to be doing. So Joe was like, okay, that's the Old Testament. Please cut this out and move on to the New Testament. So I'm thinking, all right, well, this is where it's going to heat up. All right, I'm going to be converted and into this Jesus thing. Do you guys know how the New Testament starts? It's a list of names. I'm like, this is not getting off to a very compelling start. And so I'm reading this book, and I honestly could not make heads or tails of it. I just couldn't figure out I could get the stories about Jesus, but in terms of any details, It was like if you're eavesdropping on a conversation from someone from a totally different culture. I couldn't understand exactly what I was supposed to be taking away from this book. And the thing that troubled me the most is I didn't see a clear case for what I knew to be the traditional Christian moral code. Abortion, euthanasia, issues like this. I didn't see this spelled out very clearly. And I would ask, online, I was doing a lot of discussions online, and people would say, oh, Jen, you have to read the whole New Testament and then read the Old Testament so that you can interpret the scriptures in conjunction with one another. And I wanted to be like, do you guys have jobs? Because who has time for that? I had little kids at the time. I'm like, I can't read the entire Bible and become a scripture scholar. And even then, I probably still wouldn't know how to interpret it. And by the way, this system of I read the Bible and interpret the entire thing for myself, this requires literacy. The world literacy rate today is only 80%. The world literacy rate in most times and places in history, most people couldn't read. And before the printing press, the average person could never own a Bible when they had to be hand copied. The printing press came on the scene in the 1500s. Let alone own a Bible or a concordance or other books to help you understand it. And I said, not only does this system not work, it's not a universal system because it requires literacy, it requires the printing press, but also the fact that there's so much disagreement among people who read the Bible about, is euthanasia okay? Is abortion okay? I saw plenty of people of different Christian backgrounds with all these different interpretations. And some people would say, well, we're not generally, okay with abortion, but, sometimes it's okay. Euthanasia, yeah, sometimes. And then other Christians would say, no, that stuff is not okay. And some people would say, well, we as Christians we can agree to disagree on these things. But as someone coming from the outside looking in, it was very clear to me, no, you can't. Because C.S. Lewis, fellow former atheist, C.S. Lewis points out that God is good. He is the source of everything we yearn for when we say we yearn for goodness. And so to define a moral code, to separate what is good from what is bad, is to separate what is of God from what is not of God. I was asking modern Christianity, who is Jesus Christ? You're asking me to follow him. Okay, I'm interested. Who is he? Because the Jesus who says, you do you. Whatever you really want to do is fine. If you need to take a human life now and then, it is what it is. That Jesus is a different Jesus from the one that says you must respect all human life from conception to natural death, even upon pain of great personal sacrifice. Those are two different Jesuses. And modern Christianity could not give me the answer, who is Jesus Christ and what does he stand for? So again, I was doing a lot of this online. I was having discussions on this blog that I had started. Little did I know, I had a bunch of Christians talking to me. Little did I know that a bunch of them were Catholic. I did not understand this at the time, because to me, all Christians were basically the same. So I went on my blog and I said, look, this system does not make sense. This system of I read the Bible, I interpret everything it says, I know everything about Christianity. It requires literacy, it requires the printing press. There are as many different opinions about who Jesus is as there are people. Y'all's system is a disaster. I thought I had some great points. I thought that these people were going to respond and say, oh my gosh, Jen, you're so right. Where is the nearest Buddhist temple? Our religion is a disaster. They came back and they said something interesting. They said, think about this for a second. What if before Jesus ascended to heaven, what if he founded a church? Just one church. What if he promised to stay with it until the end of the age? And what if, just like he did with the writers of the Bible, he took imperfect people who sin, people who screw up, and what if he used those imperfect people to convey his perfect truth? And what if this church was his living church that speaks with his authority on who he is and what he stands for all the ages? And I said, Yes, yes. That would explain how illiterate people can come to know Christ and what he stands for. They can encounter his living church. That explains how this worked before the printing press. It also explains something I'd wondered about. The Bible, as we know it, did not exist for the first 300 years of Christianity. If you look at the early writings of the church fathers, they'll talk about reading the memoirs of the apostles. They were just letters that circulated. How did the Bible come together? What did those Christians do before we had the Bible? Yes, 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 this theory of like one church with Jesus' authority, yes, that makes so much sense. They said, that's the Catholic Church. And I said, oh no, 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 no. Come on. The church is anti-woman, it's antiquated, they have all these bizarre beliefs. And Joe, raised Southern Baptist, he was like, all right, Jen, you've been spending a lot of time on the internet lately. Now you're talking to Catholic internet people. Like, this is getting really bad. It's maybe time for a little sabbatical here. And what I said to him was, I don't think we have another choice. He had been interested in my religious explorations. I said, I don't think there's another option here. Because this is the only theory within Christianity that makes sense. And so we did the most countercultural thing I've ever done in my life. I actually looked up what the Catholic Church has to say for itself rather than just what I hear in pop culture and what the stereotypes are. And the only way to describe it, when I read the Catholic Catechism and studied the church and what it believes, and even the crazy teachings, even the ones that you're like, yeah, probably not that one because that one's weird. No, even like all the craziest teachings, all of them. My husband and I both, having the only thing we had in common spirituality-wise when we got married is that we were both anti-Catholic. And when we studied what the church actually believes, both of us said, it is like we've found the owner's manual to the human soul. This church knows us better than we know ourselves. And we said, when you look at the fact that the hierarchy has been corrupt so many times in history. The administration of this church is a disaster today. It's always been a disaster. It's always had sinful people in it. And that only makes it more inexplicable that this church has been saying the same truth that is like the owner's manual to the human soul for age after age as empire after empire has fallen away around it. We looked at each other and we said, I see the fingerprints of God here. I see something that human beings cannot do on their own. And so at Easter Vigil 2007, both Joe and I became Catholic. All right, yeah, a round of applause for that. And we rode off into the sunset and didn't have any problems, the end, right? Those of you who've come back to your faith, life gets super easy when you rediscover your Catholic faith. No, I thought that was the end, right? I think I even said it on my blog, oh, well, this is, the end of my story here, now I'm Catholic. It was the beginning. So one of the things that happened at that time, we already had 2 kids. We so believed in the church's teaching on the idea of openness to life. Children are a gift. It doesn't mean you have to be crazy like the Fulwilers and have all these kids, but you see children as a gift. Well, we had a surprise pregnancy come along. It was kind of one of those yeah, we do think that children are a blessing and a gift. We just thought we could wait a little longer for the gift. And it was a true crisis pregnancy. We were starting a business, so we had been living with my mom. We didn't have a place to live. We were out of room in her little spare bedroom. So we needed a house. Even if we got a house, we didn't have furniture to put in this house because we'd been living downtown. And the biggest thing was, I had very recently been diagnosed with a life-threatening blood clotting disorder. And the medicine that I needed to treat this blood clotting disorder, that truly for life-saving purposes, was $1,000 a month. We had no money for the medicine, no money for a house. And I turned to God, and holding my hands in prayer, I did not sign up for this. I thought being Catholic was going to be like being atheist, but with less free time on Sundays. I thought that I just had a different worldview and I thought about things differently, and that was it. I found the truth. The truth is a concept, right? This was a whole different ballgame than I signed up for. And one night, I was crying, I was so stressed out, and I came across this quote from Blessed Mary Elizabeth Hesselblad, where she said, "Lord, I ask not to see the path in front of me. I will hold your hand, and I will close my eyes so that you know how much trust I place in you." And it was one of those times where I knew that quote was for me, and I knew it was what I was supposed to be doing. So I said, well, first, I was like, Lord, I say again, I did not sign up for this. But since I'm in a situation that I cannot fix on my own, I'm going to close my eyes. And so I crossed myself, and I said this prayer, and I said, I need a house. And I don't have any furniture for this house, so I need a couch and a coffee table and a refrigerator and lawn equipment and a bed for the spare bedroom. Also, I need this medicine taken care of. It's $1,000 a month, and I don't have the money. Amen. It's a good thing God looks out for fools. So the next weekend, Joe and I were coming home from Mass. There was a traffic detour. We were sent by a house that had a for sale by owner sign up. Long story short, that for sale by owner sign had only been put up 2 hours before. The guy who owned the house was in a big hurry to sell. We got that house so cheap that our mortgage company required a notarized affidavit that we had no previous relationship with the owner. Shortly after that, my mom said she heard that we got this house. I told nobody about this prayer, by the way, nobody. My mom said, you know, I've got black appliances in my kitchen, but I have this white fridge and it just really stands out. Could I give you my refrigerator so that I could get a new one? My dad found out he got a job opportunity in a fully furnished apartment, and he said, hey, I've got a couch, a coffee table, and a bed that it's not gonna fit in this apartment because it's furnished. Do you have any use for that? And then the guy who we bought the house from was moving to a place where the lawn equipment was taken care of. He called us, he said, I'm gifting you all of my lawn equipment as a gift with the house. Then I went to get this medicine that was, again, it was a bit like, let's say $986 a month, say. I didn't have the money for it. And I needed this medicine. But sometimes they would give me samples if I went down to the pharmacy. So I took the kids with me. I made sure it was nap time, so they were screaming. I messed up my hair so I look extra pathetic. And so I was gonna go in and be like, oh, would you please give me some samples of this medicine? And before I could start my song and dance, the girl says, that'll be a $30 copay. And I thought about just taking it and running, but I didn't want to deal with the paperwork. So I said, no, it's like 986, something dollars. She said, no, it's $30, there you go. And that was I needed it every month. So that was for a 1 month supply. I got the medicine for $30. And I walked outside and I looked heavenward and I said, was that you, God? Because old atheist habits die hard. I'm like, that could have been a coincidence. Was that you? And so I go on, there are all of these other signal graces, all of these other answered prayers. And then one of the things that happened is that God sent my husband on this whole different career track. Long story short, my husband got new insurance that would cover my pregnancy, even as a pre-existing condition, all of the medicine, and it would only be a $50 copay. And I'm telling you my insurance details for a reason. I'm not gonna get out a claim form like, what do you guys, have I met my deductible? Like, telling you this for a reason. So the new insurance was just about to start, $50 copay. So I thought, I'll go back to the pharmacy one more time. It doesn't matter because the new insurance starts soon, but I'll go back to the pharmacy one more time and get this medicine on the $30 copay, save a few bucks. So I go back, this was the next month. I go to get the medicine and the kid rings it up and he says, oh, whoa, what are you doing here? This is like $986. And I said, no, yeah, I don't know what changed, but last time I was here, suddenly it was $30. I don't know. And he looked and he said, no, it's not. I'm looking at this. This is very expensive. And I said, well, no, you'll see. Just look up my last transaction. And he types for the longest time. And he looks at me and he said, ma'am, there is no record of that transaction. And I was like, okay, God, that was you. I get it. What is the takeaway from this crazy series of answered prayers I have? Is it that you give God a laundry list of everything you want in your life and he gives it to you? No. Although if that is the case, I have my eye on the iPhone X, Lord, if we're still doing that in my life. No, that was a special series of things that happened to me because that was the final thing that I had to understand about truth. Truth is not a concept. Truth is a person. Truth is the living person of Jesus Christ. And if you think of your search for spiritual truths as something that you just read about in books, as data that you evaluate, you will never fully understand what it is to encounter the truth. The process of finding spiritual truth is closer to a process of falling in love than it is to like switching political parties or coming to some other point of view. It is like the process of falling in love in the sense that yes, you have to bring your mind to it. You have to bring your reason to it. You have to have good intellectual reasons for why you love someone. But at the end of the day, you have to approach it with humility, with vulnerability, and with the willingness to encounter another person. So the final story that I want to leave you with is to fast forward. We came into the church and we had to have the children baptized. And one of the things I will say is different denominations debate adult versus infant baptism. I will just say nobody advocates for toddler baptism. Ask me how I know. I had to baptize my 3-year-old. He's with us at the event. You'll see my kids walking around. It's my oldest. He would end up screaming, like I had to carry him out of the church screaming. He screamed, "I don't want to be baptized," while he was being baptized. And this is in front of the whole congregation, guys. And I was so distracted by his bad behavior that, when they walk up, the deacon he said, "I'm going to ask you, what do you ask of the church for this child?" And you say baptism. But I missed that because I had my hands so full with him. So in front of the whole congregation, the deacon walks up to me and he's like, "What do you want of the church for this child?" And I'm thinking, it's like an impromptu, I can give a little speech. So I was about to step forward like, "I ask that he be a man of God, strong in his faith." And luckily Joe leans into the deacon's mic and is like, "Baptism?" So that was the whole baptism process. But leading up to that, I was looking for something to wear. I like to wear a lot of black. I used to be goth. Like I have all this black clothes. So I had nothing to, I'm like, I can't be like the goth mom at the baptism. So I'm looking in all of these drawers, like surely I have something like pink or purple at least. Could not find anything to wear to this baptism. And as I'm going through my clothes, I kept asking, how did I get here? I wasn't just an atheist, I was like a super atheist. Like how did I get here? I didn't even marry a Catholic. I married someone, the only thing we had in common spirituality-wise is that we were both anti-Catholic. Lord, how did I possibly get here? And with that question on my lips, I opened a drawer, and to the front slid a long, narrow box. Can anyone guess what it is? My baptism candle. So I was baptized in a Catholic church when I was 6 months old by grandparents that I never really knew. They were my maternal grandparents. They both died when I was young. And it was their request that all the babies in the family be baptized. And I mean, that side of the family fell so far away from the Catholic Church. I had so little connection to Catholicism from that side of the family that when I was in high school, I asked someone a stupid question and they replied, "Come on, Jen, is the Pope Catholic?" I had to turn to the person next to me and say, "Is the Pope Catholic?" Like, I literally did not know. That is how far away I was from Catholicism. But yet, the moment that the priest said the words of baptism and poured those waters over my head when I was a baby, I was sealed with an indelible mark of belonging to Christ, a mark that even an entire life as an unrepentant atheist could not wash away. And so I think first of all, there's hope for anyone, even people who have not been baptized. But for those of you in the room who have been baptized, you will go through ups and downs in your life. You will have moments probably where you doubt your faith, Maybe where you look around at the church at other Catholics and say, I don't know if I fit in here. You will have moments where you wonder if your sins are too big for the church. You might fall away, you might have difficult times, but I want to assure you that you can always count on the grace of your baptism to guide you home. Thank you.
Our speaker today is the president of the Augustine Institute. He is also a professor of sacred scripture at St. John Vianney Theological Seminary